And again, my name is Dr. Angela Booker. I'm the Director for Diversity and Inclusion for those of you who are just joining us. And so, as we get ready to get this exciting talk about privilege, again, give you this brief biography about alumnus Mr. Ward. Okay, so Justis Ward graduated from Mercer University in 2017 with a BS in biochemistry and molecular biology. Shout out to all the biology majors in the building here today. He's planned to go directly to medical school and has even been accepted. However, just a few months before graduating, he heard and followed a different path. He followed a different path in life, becoming a math and science teacher in one of the Title I elementary schools in Macon, Georgia. Justis immediately saw and felt firsthand the impact of racial disparity and generational poverty. That experience, alongside with the global pandemic and national unrest in the early 2020, prompted Justis to start an online publishing company called Good Stories for Kids, through which he now publishes stories and articles to help facilitate much needed conversations between adults and children. From racism to private parts, his free online children's library is being accessed all over the world and is transforming homes and classrooms one kid at a time. So now, if I could have Mr. Ward, use his pronouns, him and he, if I could have you to join us tonight and get ready to share your screen. So without further ado, this is Mr. Ward. Thank you so very much for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. No, it's an honor. I'll start off by saying go Bears. As she said, I had amazing time. I graduated in 2017. The class of 2017, I entered in 2013. And in that time, it was truly time well spent, hanging with friends, playing intramurals and winning intramurals. I want to put that in there. But then also playing with my band 317, who I also discovered that friend group while in college. And then lastly, but definitely not least, where I met my now wife, Jordan, at Mercer University. So truly time well spent. And as she hinted at, I went for biochemistry. I saw it on their website when I was looking in high school, and I went and I did it. I finished it, and I was on the pre-med track. And I was excited to become a pediatrician. But my senior year, my life changed forever when I heard a call and I answered it. And for those of you who are in the faith, I believe that I most certainly heard a call from God, and he told me to do something different. So even though I had gotten accepted into med school, a shift occurred. And because of that, I entered the classroom, as she said, and I became a math and science teacher. And in those 2 years, at a Title I school in East Macon, there I saw the lack of access to resources, extreme poverty, emotional immaturity, and academic proficiency gaps. And essentially what that means is students who are in the 5th grade who should be essentially reading on a 5th grade level or higher, we would hope for higher even maybe. In some cases, we're reading on 1st, 2nd grade, and in extreme versions, but in honestly real versions, there were some children reading on 5th grade, on kindergarten levels. And from that, I realized something had to be done. And I said, I prayed and I asked God, what can I do? And it was in my 2nd year that I started Good Stories for Kids. And with the mission of creating and producing and releasing hundreds of free children's books for parents, teachers, and kids worldwide. What I found was that there were plenty of books for kids to read, and plenty of good books for kids to read. But some of those books were missing on the important parts of life that kids need to be a part of. Those conversations were being mixed. I remember when the Ahmaud Arbery shooting happened, I was still doing, it was virtual school at this point, but I was still doing school. And because of the media and because of social media, my kids were exposed to that, and they're asking questions. And they're saying, Mr. Ward, why did it happen? They're 3rd graders, and they want to know, why did it happen? Would it happen to me if I'm running down the street? And because I did not know how to have that conversation with them, me being an adult, them being children, I decided I was going to start writing stories and explain the scenarios through stories, using animals, using children, using plants, whatever it might be, to explain these big adult topics, these adult subjects, in a way that kids can understand foundationally, that would be able to move them forward. And so some of the topics that I've covered so far are racism, as I've said, policing and police brutality, pregnancy, decision making, selfishness, and many more. At this point, I have 13 books online, and with a new one coming out every 1 to 2 weeks. And I think I have about 12 articles that match that. And so that is actually how I was, I guess, noticed by some of my friends who told me about the Bear Talks. And it was an honor for you to invite us here, to invite me here, Dr. Booker, and to be able to share with you today about one of these topics that I've written about, and that is privilege. So, being a teacher, we have what's called learning targets in our class, in our curriculum. And so the learning targets for today, or the goals for today, when you leave this talk, my hope is that you can understand 4 things. And that is for you to be able to say these sentences in the affirmative and to believe it. And that is, I can define privilege. I can explain privilege. I can identify my privileges, and I can advocate for others using my privilege. If you notice, everybody should be able to say these things, which means some things that we think about privilege are probably wrong. And we're going to jump into that. So let's go ahead and do that and get into the first one. I can define privilege. This is the website of a man named Josh Sager. And the website is called The Progressive Cynic. I highly encourage you to go and read it, not because I agree with everything that he said, but because he offers very, very sharp and poignant perspectives on politics, on religion, a lot of things. And I actually got the definition for privilege from this site. And as you can see from his face, that is essentially the mood that you're going to get through all of his articles. He's not messing around. He's not there for the ads. He's completely money free. It's a free service. You can subscribe, but there's no ads on the site. And he's adamant that he's offering his opinion, his well-researched opinions, with no external bias. Of course, we're all biased, so he has a bias. But he wants to make sure that he's not being swayed by politics, partisanship, et cetera, et cetera. So let's jump in. The definition that he provided on his website was, the term privilege refers to systemic social biases that give certain segments of the population preferential treatment over others. This bias can be based around any demographic distinction, including race, language, religion, class, gender, socioeconomic status, or sexual orientation. There's 2 parts that I want to point out in specific, and that is systemic social biases, and then secondly, that is around any demographic distinction. I think that's really important because a lot of times when we think about privilege, one of the first things we think of is, of course, white privilege. That's one of the resounding terms right now in media, or maybe not so much media, but in social media and in social conversations. But the reality is, this bias, this privilege that we receive in different topics can and will be given based on any demographic distinction. So that can be based off my long fingers. That can be based off the fact that I'm Black. That can be based off the fact that I live in America, live in Georgia. All of these things have to do with privilege and who receives privilege. There are 2 ways that I believe the world has looked at privilege so far. And I want to go ahead and tell you that we're going to essentially break these down and reconstruct them in a way that is more fitting to today's current national and global situation, but also in a way that's going to allow you to go out immediately after this conversation that we have and to have your own conversation with others. And so the first way that we look at privilege is that it is foundationally bad. And continues to be bad all the way throughout. So you may have heard this, but these are direct quotes I've heard from people, and that is, oh, that's your privilege speaking. So if someone were to say something that maybe you don't think that you could say due to a difference in skin color, gender, whatever it might be, people have said, oh, that's your privilege speaking. Or they'll say something like, that's white privilege right there, or oh, that's black privilege if you're in, a specific demographic. Um, and so if you see in this box, I wanted to put his there because what I've noticed is that in the topic of conversation, and especially in this nation, well, I'm sorry, let me take a pause real quick because although I read the definition, I want to make sure that I really elaborate and hammer down the fact that privilege is all about location and demographic. The reality is a global privilege is very different from, say, a household privilege. When we think about privilege, your parents have privilege that you don't have if you're a child or a teen or still living at home based on the fact that there is a hierarchy or there are social biases in place within the household. The same can be said about a state, a nation, and the world. And so what I've noticed in America is the leading ethnicities, being the white and black, at least in the social view, are black people usually using these phrases, that's your privilege speaking, or that's white privilege right there, in a very derogatory and negative perspective or view. And so what that leads is white people having white privilege and therefore being a white problem. And I want to debunk that today. And we'll get into that in a second. But then secondly, people look at privilege as being foundationally good. You may have heard of an instance where Louis Giglio, who is the lead pastor of Passion City Church, who has given wonderful sermons before. He was sitting down with Lecrae and another individual who I can't think of his name right now, unfortunately. But what Giglio said was he wanted to change the idea or the term white privilege to white blessing. But by doing that, he then referenced back to slavery and saying that slavery was a white blessing. And I'm not even going to get into the rights and wrongs of that. But what I do want to say is the approach he took was that privilege is foundationally good. And that's also incorrect. And what we really want to do is look at privilege as not a problem, but the fruit of a problem. And what do I mean by that? We have here a tree, and this tree is centuries old, millennia old. But in the soil, in the root system, we have pseudoscience where researched and educated scientists came up with the evidence that black people are inferior to white people, and therefore racism isn't a thing. It's slavery because they deserve to be slaves. It's pseudoscience. It wasn't real, but people believed it. We have nationalism, where people are discriminated against based not on their skin color, but where they're from. They could look white, they could look brown, but the reality is because they're maybe from a Middle Eastern country, they get a side eye that someone of the same color, but from, say, Nicaragua wouldn't get. And then we have, of course, prejudice, oppression. All of these things make up the foundation of this tree. Privilege is not the soil. Privilege is not the tree. Privilege is the fruit. And so what will we do with this fruit? What do we do with this fruit? And the way that the foundationally bad sector looks at it is that fruit is poisonous, that fruit is bad, we won't use it at all. We're going to take it, we're going to throw it away, and we're not going to use it at all. That's not it. It's wrong. But then we also have the foundationally good, and therefore not only is the apple good for you to eat, but the soil, there's nothing wrong. There's no tainting in the soil, and the tree's good too. So the apple's also good, and that's also not true. And what I want to say is the foundation is terrible. The foundation needs to be addressed. However, the apple can be used, even though the tree is in a murky, shadowy, disgusting place. The reality is that the apple can still be taken and eaten And here's the biggest part, given to others. And we're going to get into that. So I've already hit on this in that um, people hate the word privilege. They hate it. I've had a few conversations where I've brought it up, and people are immediately turned off by it, especially white people, but then even more so, especially white males, at least in my conversations. Um, and that's because there's again, a derogatory sense in it. And I want to be able to change that, because if people hate privilege, then they hate their own fortunes. And the reality is, a man cannot be fortunate if he doesn't see what he has as fortune. A man cannot also bless someone from their fortune if he doesn't see what he possesses as being fortune. Why would I give away something that is pointless? And so that's what I want to address today. And to do that, I think it is necessary to change privilege to exemption. The definition is not going to change. If I went back to that previous slide from the Josh Sagar's website, that's the same. The working definition is still the same, but the term we're going to use is exemption. And by doing that, we are going to reshape the conversation about privilege. Exemption, you see what I did there? Hardy hard. Okay, let's keep going. So 3 things to know about exemption. The first thing being, we all have exemption, just in different categories of life. Well, Justice, what do you mean? Well, just like I say, we all have privileges. We all have exemption as well. I'm just changing the word out. But if you don't believe me, let's play a game. In this game, the rules are very simple. If you agree with what I put on screen, give yourself a tally mark. You can put it on your fingers. You can write it down on the table in front of you. You can put it in your phone. Just put, I don't know, maybe a period or an I or a 1, and then we'll add them up at the end. And then if you don't agree or if you don't identify with what comes up on screen, don't do anything. Let that one go by until you get to the next one. So I'll give you a second to get a piece of paper or get your phone out, whatever you need to do. Get out the notes section on your computer. This is very important. And it's important that you do it so that when we get to the end, you'll have something to do with it. All right, here we go. All right, again, it's going to be about 3 seconds. If you identify with it, put a tally mark or a dot or whatever it is. If you don't identify, do nothing. Let's start off easy. Human. If you identify with being a human, if you would say that you are part of this people group, put a tally mark. That's 1 for me. You might not put 1 there, but I am. If you are a native English speaker, put another tally mark. If you are tall, now I think the important part here is that this is clearly subjective, but that's because the biases are also subjective. So it's whatever you identify with. If you think you're tall, if you've been told you're tall or whatever, it doesn't matter. Your decision. I want you to put a tally mark. Thin. If you would say you're thin, put a tally mark. If you wouldn't say that, no tally mark. All right, no more descriptions. We're just going to go through it now. Here we go. No speech impediment. Christian. Male. White. Attractive. Cis. Now, this is a word that has come up in women and gender studies, but essentially it's right there in parentheses. To be cis is to be someone who identifies with the gender that you're given at birth. So if I grew up or if I was given the gender of male at birth, but as I grow up, I begin to identify as something other than male, then I'm not cis. That's all you need to know. We can go deeper, of course, but for the purpose of this, just know if you don't identify with your gender that you were given at birth, then you wouldn't mark this. Next up, heterosexual. able-bodied, standard accent. Again, completely subjective. It's up to you as to how you want to um, quantify or qualify what standard means. No criminal record. Mentally healthy. Support mainstream political party. You can determine what mainstream is. For me, Republican, Democrat, but you can choose to put independent in there if you want. Adult. Born in the country of residence. So if you were born in America and you reside in America, this one applies to you. If you were born in Italy but now live in America, this doesn't apply to you. Wealthy. Intelligent. Employed. First world living. So the definition that Sagar gave was to live in an industrialized and then capitalist country. So if you live in that, this applies to you. Well-connected family. Not a redhead. And lastly, but not least, educated. Okay, so that's the 25. How did you do? So I want you to do is go ahead and tally up what you got. You might have to count. I'm gonna have to count because there's no diagonal slash. And then I want you to actually post your number in the chat section. If you don't know where the chat section is, if you go to the more, then you'll have the chat here. Some of you might actually have chat already there floating. So I'll be looking to see what you guys put, and I'll even be posting mine as well. Thank you guys for participating. It makes it so much better. This is awesome. Give you guys about 10 more seconds. Now, the powerful part about this exercise is the fact that there is such a wide variety. And being that we're all different shades, we're all different ethnicities, we're different genders, et cetera, it goes to show that no one is without some privilege. And at the very least, you have the privilege of humanity. And so we can all use our privileges. And if you have a lower score, that just means that you're part of fewer.
Okay.
It's back to being okay. Yes, no feedback? Excellent, okay. So with that being said, and if you have a higher score, you are part of more exempt groups. You're part of more privileged groups. So where do we go from here? So we've already talked about we all have exemption, just in different categories, and we see that most people actually walk around every day unaware of their exemption. And there's not much to say about that other than it's the truth. People don't see in what ways they have quote unquote fortune. And because of that, they don't see ways in which they can bless other people, where they can help other people. And we're going to get more into that at the end. But then the third thing being exempt doesn't make you undeserving. And I think that's a tough pill to swallow for some people. For the purpose of understanding it a little more clearly, being privileged doesn't make you undeserving of whatever it is you have success in, whatever it is you've possessed or obtained. So here's a conversation that I've heard before. All I'm saying is you have privileges that I don't have. And then the lady responding, I worked hard for what I have, just like anybody else. Um, if you've heard something like that, you can, put a me too, whatever in the chat comments. But the reality is that people have this perception that having privilege means that you've somehow cheated or you've somehow gotten the upper hand, you've gotten the advantage over people, and that's not what privilege is. As we've said already, it's it's a bias. It's an exemption. And so now I want to go even deeper into the exemption piece and how can you use your exemption. But we can't go there yet. First, we have to see what exactly does exemption look like. Got to stop doing that. So throughout the rest of the talk, of course, privilege equals exemption, the noun, and privileged, the adjective, is being exempt, which is also the adjective. And everyone, um, imagine a world where everyone drives semi-trucks for work. Um, that's the one way to make money. You can choose not to drive semi-trucks if you don't want to, but everybody drives semi-trucks for work. And then also with that, every driver is paid an hourly wage and receives a mileage incentive. So I'm paid by the hour, and every mile that I go, I get more money. So in other words, everybody's doing the same amount of work, and in order to make more money, I have to work more. In other words, everyone is working hard if you are working. Now let's look at exemption. Driver one is the average driver. That driver works hard and does as many shipments as possible a day. If his truck needs maintenance, he fixes it without any complaints. And truck driving for driver number one is more than just a job, it's a craft that's been passed down to him from his father and his father's father. Okay? While we have driver two, who is a first generation driver. That driver has worked hard and does as many shipments as possible. Notice that was the exact same bullet from driver one. However, his parents and grandparents never learned how to drive. So he went to college to learn the skill of truck driving, but lacks the experience and the mentorship. It's driver two. Now driver three. Driver three is an immigrant driver. He works hard and does as many shipments as possible. I hope you're noticing the trend in that first bullet. He was born in a foreign nation, and he knows the skill of truck driving very well, but because he was an immigrant, he was required to make routine stops or else face being deported. Driver four is a female driver who works hard and does as many shipments as possible, but she's viewed as unskilled based solely on her outer appearance. She's actually able to deliver her cargo in expert times, but she rarely gets hired to make shipments, again, because she's a female. And then lastly, there's the historically oppressed driver who works hard and does as many shipments as possible. But his family learned to drive when it was illegal for them, starting a business and passing on the legacy. And even though the family has passed on the skill for generations, due to the historical oppression and due to the fact that they had to hide it because it was illegal, that family's truck is in shambles. And it's actually the same truck that his grandfather drove. And the truck gets the job done, but it drives half as fast as the newer models, and it breaks down twice as much. Average, first gen, immigrant, female, and the historically oppressed. Who would you pick? If you had to put money right now, what if I told you that if I click this button, a simulation is going to start? This is for real. And when the simulation starts, there's an algorithm that, based on the things that I've said and based on the type of characteristics I've placed into this program, you'll see a cargo go up here on each of these trucks depending on their characteristics, and then they're going to go across here with the cargo and drop it off. Then get another cargo over here and come back. The starting line is this gray line, and it is also the finish line. I want you to type right now in the comments section, who you're going to gamble on. And to make it even better, Dr. Booker and I have already prearranged that if you get the correct truck right, based on the comment, you have to comment it before I reveal the answer by pressing start. But if you get it right, $5 gift card. It's not a lot, but it's $5. Come on now. $5 gift card for whoever gets the correct person. Is it going to be the average person who gets there and comes back? First gen, immigrant, female, or historically oppressed driver? Go ahead, you got about, I'll give you 20 seconds to type into the chat who you think is going to win. You get $5. Come on now, don't miss your monies. About to press start. Okay, about 10 more seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 3, 2, 1, 0. I'm looking, and the large majority has put average. My number is 19. Oh, that's from earlier today for the privilege points that we did in the earlier game. All right, I'm about to press start. Here we go. When I click this, it's going to show the truck going across, and somebody's going to win. Just kidding. This game was false. Okay, and I'm sorry to lie to you, but I had to prove a point. And the point is, when it came to getting your money, you were willing to gamble on the person that you thought was going to get the job done for you. Welcome to corporate America. Welcome to a capitalist nation. Now, somebody's going to take that wrong and say, oh, he doesn't want us to be in a capitalist nation. I didn't say that. Oh, and he doesn't like corporate America. I didn't say that either. But what I am saying is, just like you made a choice of who to bet on based on the pre-existing conditions, that's what happens every single day. And the reality is, it's not driver one's fault. I'm going to say this one more time for the people in the back. It is not driver one's fault. We cannot blame driver one for being picked by corporate America. He's been living his life. He did not affect 2 through 5 in any way. It's not his fault. The race was fair. They all started at the starting line, but the obstacles were not fair. And here's the reality. A lot of times when you talk to people about their privilege, the first thing they'll say is, I've worked for what I've got just like you have. Or because of policies or whatever, the starting line is the same for everyone. If we're both born on the same day, you and I have both the same opportunities. But the reality is, even though our opportunities are the same, the obstacles that we face are not the same. That is privilege. Driver one is not to blame for the hardships of 2 through 5. However, he is exempt from them. He is exempt from them. Exemption is not an advantage. Exemption is the luxury of not being disadvantaged. I'm going to say that one more time. Exemption is not an advantage over other people. It is the exemption and therefore the luxury of not being disadvantaged. You're exempt from obstacles that others cannot avoid. If we use the different analogy of a foot race, we're all on the starting line. We all hear the person say, set, the gun fires, and now we're all running. But the reality is, some people never had anybody to teach them how to run due to the fact that maybe generationally, their family's been in prison for all of their life. Anyone that could ever teach them how to run has been in prison. They're running based off of how they taught themselves how to run. Or maybe there's someone who was born with deficiencies. So maybe they're disabled in some way. And so they're running the same race, but they have disadvantages because they have obstacles that other people don't have to face. Or maybe some people have rocks and stones on their pathway, which nobody else has to deal with. And so as they're running, they're tripping, they're rolling their ankle, and they're still having to run. We can't fault the people who don't have any obstacles. But what we can do is acknowledge the fact that obstacles are in place for some people. Privilege is not an advantage. Privilege is the luxury of not being disadvantaged. So where do we go from here? What I've learned in conversations with both adults and children is that exempt groups, the driver ones of the world, want non-exempt people to validate their work and their success. They're saying from their mouth, I'm not privileged, I'm not exempt, but the reality is their heart is crying out, don't invalidate my life's work. Don't tell me that all of the success that I have is because I'm lucky or because people value me more than they value you. Don't tell me that I am working my butt off every single day and it's worth nothing because somebody else gave it to me. That's what exempt groups are saying. But then on the flip side, non-exempt groups, the drivers 2 through 5, are wanting exempt people to acknowledge that what non-exempt people have to go through is not common and it's not their own fault. It's not because I'm lazy. It's not because I don't want to work. It's because I have obstacles in my pathway that I can't get over unless somebody has compassion, unless somebody sees those obstacles and with their exemption from those obstacles helps me get through or over those obstacles. And I want to tell both of those groups, I hear you. To the exempt and the non-exempt, I hear you, and this is why. Because I am you. In both cases. Nobody, when we did that test earlier today with the 25 points, nobody had 25 points. Not one person had 25 points. And that means in some categories you were exempt, but at least in one, and I think the highest number I saw was 23, at least in 2 categories, you're non-exempt. At least in 2 categories, which means you really can understand what people are going through. But again, the point number 2 that I made earlier, people walk around every day not knowing that they have exemption. They just don't know. So let's look at the goals that we set today. I can define privilege. We use that. The term privilege refers to systemic social biases that give certain segments of the population preferential treatment over others. And it can be based around any demographic distinction. Okay, we had that already. That's a check. 2, I can explain privilege. So I hope that you guys would be able to say privilege isn't the problem. It's the fruit of the problem. The soil, the foundation may be bad, but we can still use the apple for good. And we haven't gotten to what that looks like, but we're going to get there. And then also that exemption is not an advantage, but it's the luxury of not being disadvantaged. Some people might say, well, if you're not disadvantaged, that must mean you're advantaged. No. If you're not disadvantaged, that means you're just living. You're neutral, average. But some people are below average based on their conditions. Last but not least, I can identify my privileges. That was the game we played, the 25 that we just talked about. And those are just 25 that I came up with. There's a plethora of more. And anything that you think about, if you look around, I'm in a house, that's a privilege. Some people live in apartments. I'm looking at Dr. Booker's background screen right now. The reality is she's a professor. She's got doctor at the front of her name, privilege. And we all have privileges, but if we don't identify them, we can't do the last. I can advocate for others using my privileges. And so now it's story time. As I said earlier, I am a author and a speaker. Here I am speaking with you. And this is my website. All you have to do is type in justisward.com. And here on the first page, the homepage, is our library. So you click on this, and it'll take you immediately to the books that we have. As I said, we've got 13 books now and growing. And here we have the hashtags that are have to do with the topics of the books. Everything from self-control, taking responsibility, discrimination here with I do not like dogs. But the book we're going to read today, as you can see, Mr. Mandela had 13 umbrellas. I hope you guys enjoy this. It is geared towards children, but what I've found is that regardless of your age, a good children's book speaks to the masses. Mr. Mandela had 13 umbrellas. He took one wherever he went. He had big ones, small ones, short ones, tall ones. He even had one that could bend. All of the town knew Mr. Mandela because Mr. Mandela was kind. If he ever saw someone without an umbrella, he would say, "Here, have one of mine." One day he saw a man stuck in the rain. That man was as wet as a well. Mr. Mandela gave the man his umbrella. So then Mr. Mandela had 12. The day after that, he walked past two men. They were trying to straighten a fence. He ran home and brought them back two big umbrellas. Now Mr. Mandela had 10. Mr. Mandela saw a family of 4. Their car was in need of a fix. He didn't have tools, but he did have umbrellas. Now Mr. Mandela had 6. He gave one to an officer, one to a doctor, and one to a dog and a cat. He gave one to a bird and a bumblebee. He even gave one to a rat. Mr. Mandela had one more umbrella. This was his favorite one, too. And as he was walking, he saw an old lady. He knew what he needed to do. Mr. Mandela had 0 umbrellas. Now he was the one that was wet. He splished and he splashed as he walked through the town, with rain falling onto his head. Mr. Mandela, here, have my umbrella. He looked up to see 13 big grins. And the people and creatures he had given umbrellas now gave their umbrellas to him. Now, the beautiful thing about this book is, again, privilege, exemption can be seen in so many different ways. You can look at it in one of two ways. Mr. Mandela was exempt from the struggle of being wet. He got to walk around, and because of his excess number of umbrellas, he didn't have to worry ever about getting wet by the rain. However, all of these people that he interacted with, on the other hand, were not exempt from that hardship. Trying to fix a fence in the rain, trying to fix a car in the rain, walking to work in the rain. All of these things having to do with the simple fact of we're getting wet. And Mr. Mandela had the privilege of having a lot of umbrellas. The reality is just one umbrella is a privilege in a town like this where nobody has one, clearly. But Mr. Mandela had 13. And so he was able to use that privilege to better the people. And the secondary category of this talk, or not of this talk, of this book, is compassion. This story could have ended after he walked past every single person with his umbrella. That's a potential ending of the story. But the reality is he had compassion, and from his excess, from his privilege, from his exemption, he was able to reach out and help other people. The last thing I'll show you is here, this last page. This is for teachers, parents, grandparents, or just older siblings. If you like the book and you like the other ideas for the books, but you don't really know how to have the conversation, each book has a question prompting at the end of it. And so you're able to use that to be able to have these tough conversations in a way that kids can understand at any age level. So let's get back to the slideshow. Hope you enjoyed that book. So the last things that I want to say are exemption, privilege, can be utilized to the benefit of others. And then here's the big part, when it is not just viewed as a problem. If you see privilege as a problem, why would I want to give you my problem? I wouldn't want to do that. Why would I want to use my problem to help other people? It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. And therefore, in the instance of trying to talk to people, trying to figure out who you can advocate for, if all you're doing is beating yourself up for your being a boy, or for your being white, or for your being a Christian, if you're taking all of these ideas, these privileges, and beating yourself up for them, you're never going to reach out from that place. And taking the apple from the tree that wasn't good to begin with, but you can help others from it. And this is how you do it. You have to ask yourself this question: what comforts and luxuries are we willing to postpone for the betterment of someone else's life? I'm not big on trying to ask you to give up something that you can't get back. If I have this bottle of water and you are thirsty and I'm thirsty, I'm not going to ask you to give this last little bit of water to me because I'm about to die and you're about to die. Some people can make that sacrifice, but that's not the way you want to approach the conversation when you're talking about privilege. You want to talk about postponing because the reality is, I've got another one. And so while I have to give this to you, it's postponing my thirst. It's postponing my ability to receive something. And I'm going to be able to get another one due to who I am. If my resources allow me to receive more, am I willing to postpone what I have momentarily to better someone else? So with that being said, that is my talk. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you received anything from it. And I would love to hear any questions, comments, anything.